For those that watched my original review of the Akari, one of the things that I mentioned is that the very first glass pad that I used was the SkyPad 3.0. And at the time, the 3.0 was the glass pad to have. You had a lot of speed with an amount of openness, with tracking and micro adjusting that was just unmatched. There was no other glass pad that came close. And then I tried the Akari, where it blew everything that the 3.0 was. It blew everything out of the water. The speed felt better, the openness felt better, the smoothness of the pad was just incredible. So how does the Akari compare to the Kazemi? If you take the Akari and make it a slightly slower, more controlled, and more smoother version, that's what you get with the Kazemi. When you want a glass pad that has a faster speed, faster glide, you would go with the Akari. If you wanted something a little slower, had a little bit more control, and even smoother than the Akari. And I cannot, if you haven't tried an Akari before, it is hard to describe the smoothness of these pads. But to say that the Kazemi is smoother than the Akari, I have no other words. I mean, it just, the smoothness of the pads is truly something that Glassworks has nailed. No other glass pad that I have tested has had anything that has been as smooth and performed like these pads do. So again, I mean, when we're talking about the Kazemi, it's a more controlled, slightly slower than the Akari, but a more controlled and even smoother version of what the Akari was. And in terms of the level of comfort, not having to wear a sleeve, having something that's a little bit more balanced, a little bit more controlled, and an incredibly smooth surface on top of that makes this pad just an incredible glass pad for any game that you want to play. I mean, when we talk about the Kazemi having something that's a little bit more controlled, especially when you talk about glass is supposed to be super fast, not as controlled, doesn't hold you, the pad doesn't hold you back from anything. It is only you. If you play on the pad, you're the one purely in control. You're not getting any help, in a sense, from the pad, from the control, from the friction of the surface. But the Kazemi does provide a little bit more control that the Akari doesn't. So if you're looking for something that's more controlled to help you just in terms of your overall tracking and gameplay, the Kazemi performs and does that incredibly well. I think this is an incredible glass pad for those that want to start. I would have recommended the Akari first, but I think for those that want to get into glass pads, I think the Kazemi is a good start as you're going up the speed spectrum, going from like a speed cloth pad up to a glass pad. I think the Kazemi is a really good place to start. I think similar in a more controlled sense, I would recommend the Serapad Kin. But when you compare the Serapad to something like the Kazemi, you get it's a very smooth glide. There's any skate that I put on this, it's very quiet, it's very smooth, and it performs very, very well. You don't need to use any kind of cloth or any kind of sleeve during gameplay. So I think the Kazemi, for those that haven't used glass before, I think the Kazemi is an incredible place to start. So I would highly recommend it. If you're getting it, I know that you'll love this pad because it just performs incredibly well. Glassworks is absolutely killing it with these glass pads. The design, the performance of the pads. Glassworks right now is the number one glass pad on the market, just purely off of the performance and the smoothness that these pads provide. There's no competition. Glassworks is really setting themselves up to be in the number one spot, and I'm assuming that they will continue to be in the number one spot. So I look forward to whatever they do next. I know they're going to have an even faster version of the Akari coming out at some point, which is going to be mind-blowing. But these pads they perform incredibly well. So I would highly recommend it if you haven't already tried these. When we talk about the Glassworks in general, I truly do think that they are setting themselves and have already set themselves as the #1 glass pad maker on the market. The level of smoothness, the performance, the designs, they just perform so well. And I truly do think that Glassworks has set themselves up as the #1 spot and will continue to be in the #1 spot. So I would highly recommend trying Glassworks out if you haven't already. Again, as I mentioned before, if you're kind of going up the speed spectrum, if you're starting with something like a Saturn Pro or Saturn or a Tongdao and like kind of working your way up, I would recommend trying something like a Neptune first, even a Neptune Pro. Those speed pads perform very well, and as you're going up the speed spectrum, if you're wanting to try glass, I would recommend having something like the Kazemi. I know they're working on having things that are going to be more available, so I really do think that whenever they do that, they're going to set themselves up as the #1 spot. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comment section down below, and I will catch you all next time. Start a riot.